Today. Chapter 14. The Industrial Revolution, 18th–19th century. The mechanization of society and the birth of inequality on a new scale. The Industrial Revolution was one of the most transformative periods in human history, marking the shift from agrarian societies to industrialized urban economies. Beginning in the late 18th century and continuing into the 19th century, the revolution was driven by a series of technological innovations that reshaped the way people lived, worked, and interacted with one another. The development of machines such as the steam engine, the spinning jenny, and the power loom drastically increased production capacity, fundamentally changing the nature of labor, commerce, and society. While the Industrial Revolution is often celebrated as a period of remarkable progress, its benefits were not distributed evenly. The same technological advancements that spurred economic growth and innovation also created profound inequalities. Factory owners and industrialists amassed vast wealth, while workers, many of whom were displaced from rural areas by the mechanization of agriculture, faced grueling labor conditions in the factories and mines of Europe and North America. This disparity gave rise to new social tensions and economic divisions, laying the groundwork for the labor movements and political upheavals of the 19th and 20th centuries. This chapter will explore how the Industrial Revolution transformed society on an unprecedented scale, leading to rapid urbanization, the growth of factories, and the expansion of global trade networks. We will also examine how the revolution entrenched new forms of inequality, both within industrialized nations and between industrialized and non-industrialized regions, creating patterns of wealth and poverty that continue to shape the world today. The technological foundations of the Industrial Revolution. The Industrial Revolution began in Britain in the late 18th century, but its origins can be traced back to earlier technological advancements in the 17th century. Innovations in agriculture, such as the development of crop rotation and selective breeding, allowed for increased food production, which in turn supported population growth. As more people moved to cities in search of work, the demand for goods grew, driving the need for more efficient methods of production. The key technological innovations that spurred the Industrial Revolution included: 1. The steam engine. Developed by James Watt in the 1760s, the steam engine revolutionized energy production by providing a reliable source of power that could be used to drive machinery in factories, mines, and transportation. Watt's improvements to earlier steam engines made them more efficient and versatile, allowing them to be used in a wide range of industries, from textiles to iron production. The steam engine also enabled the development of railways and steamships, transforming transportation and trade. 2. The spinning jenny. Invented by James Hargreaves in 1764, the spinning jenny allowed workers to spin multiple threads of cotton at once, dramatically increasing the efficiency of textile production. This innovation laid the foundation for the mechanization of the textile industry, which became one of the driving forces of the Industrial Revolution. 3. The power loom. Developed by Edmund Cartwright in 1785, the power loom automated the process of weaving cloth, further accelerating the production of textiles. This innovation, combined with the spinning jenny, led to the rise of large-scale textile factories, particularly in Britain's industrial centres, such as Manchester and Birmingham. 4. The cotton gin. Invented by Eli Whitney in 1793, the cotton gin separated cotton fibres from seeds, making cotton processing far more efficient. This invention had a profound impact on the global cotton industry, particularly in the American South, where it fueled the expansion of cotton plantations and, tragically, the transatlantic slave trade. These technological innovations, along with others in iron production, mining, and transportation, laid the foundation for the rapid industrialization of Britain, which soon spread to other parts of Europe, the United States, and beyond. The rise of factories and urbanization. One of the most visible consequences of the Industrial Revolution was the rise of factories, large mechanized workplaces that concentrated production in a single location. Prior to industrialization, most goods were produced in small workshops or in people's homes. Through systems such as cottage industry or putting out systems, the introduction of machines like the spinning jenny and power loom required large-scale operations, leading to the construction of factories where machines could be powered by water wheels or steam engine. Factories became the new hubs of production, particularly in industries such as textiles, iron, and coal. In these factories, workers operated machines for long hours, often under harsh conditions. The shift from rural, agrarian life to urban industrial labor was a major disruption for many people as they moved from the countryside to rapidly growing cities in search of work. This urbanization transformed cities like Manchester, Liverpool, and London into bustling centers of industry, commerce, and innovation, but also into sites of profound inequality. Sexism was rampant and social inequality persisted. In the early stages of the Industrial Revolution, factory work was grueling and dangerous. Workers, including children as young as 5 or 6, labored for 12 to 16 hours a day in dimly lit, poorly ventilated factories. Injuries and accidents were common, as workers were often required to operate heavy machinery without proper safety measures. Living conditions in industrial cities were also dire, as housing could not keep pace with the influx of workers. Overcrowding, poor sanitation, and lack of access to clean water led to frequent outbreaks of disease, such as cholera and tuberculosis. Despite these hardships, industrialization created new economic opportunities for some. Factory owners, entrepreneurs, and industrialists amassed enormous wealth by taking advantage of the cheap labor supply and the growing demand for mass-produced goods. The profits generated by factories and industries allowed a small elite to enjoy unprecedented levels of wealth and luxury, while the majority of workers remained trapped in poverty and squalor. The impact of the Industrial Revolution on global trade and colonialism. The Industrial Revolution not only transformed the economies of Europe and North America, but also had far-reaching effects on global trade and imperialism. The increased production capacity of industrialized nations created a growing demand for raw materials, which could be sourced from colonies in Africa, Asia, and the Americas. This led to the expansion of European colonial empires, as nations like Britain, France, and the Netherlands sought to control resource-rich territories and secure markets for their manufactured goods. The invention of the steamship and the expansion of railroads made it easier for industrialized nations to transport goods and people across vast distances. The development of new trade routes such as the Suez Canal, completed in 1869, further facilitated the movement of goods between Europe and its colonies. The ability to transport raw materials from the colonies and export finished goods back to them allowed industrialized nations to dominate global trade, while colonies were often reduced to producers of raw materials and consumers of European goods. The impact of the Industrial Revolution on the colonies was profound. In many cases, indigenous industries were destroyed as European goods flooded local markets, undermining traditional forms of production. Colonized peoples were often forced to work in mines, plantations, or factories to produce the raw materials needed to fuel industrial growth in Europe. The exploitation of labor in the colonies, combined with the extraction of resources, enriched European powers while leaving many of the colonized regions impoverished and dependent on foreign control. The Industrial Revolution also intensified the transatlantic slave trade, particularly in the American South, where the demand for cotton skyrocketed with the mechanization of the textile industry. The invention of the cotton gin made it easier to process raw cotton, leading to the expansion of cotton plantations and the increased importation of enslaved Africans to meet the growing labor demand. The wealth generated by the cotton industry contributed to the prosperity of industrial centers in Britain and the United States, while the enslaved laborers who produced the cotton endured unimaginable suffering. Social and economic inequalities. While the Industrial Revolution brought about significant economic growth and technological innovation, it also created deep social and economic inequalities. The benefits of industrialization were concentrated in the hands of a small elite, while the working class, factory laborers, miners, and agricultural workers, faced exploitative conditions and lived in poverty. The class divide that emerged during the Industrial Revolution became a defining feature of modern capitalist societies. In industrialized cities, the contrast between the wealthy industrialists and the working poor was stark. Factory owners lived in grand houses and enjoyed the luxuries afforded by their wealth, while workers lived in cramped, unsanitary conditions, often in slums near the factories where they worked. The exploitation of labor, including the widespread use of child labor, led to public outcry and demands for reform. Early attempts to regulate labor conditions, such as the Factory Acts passed in Britain in the early 19th century, sought to limit working hours and improve safety. But these reforms were often met with resistance from industrialists, who feared that regulation would cut into their profits. The rise of labor movements and trade unions was one of the most important social consequences of the Industrial Revolution. Workers began to organize in response to the harsh conditions they faced in factories and mines, demanding better wages, shorter working hours, and safer working conditions. Strikes and labor protests became more common, and by the late 19th century, labor unions had gained enough political power to push for significant reforms, including the establishment of the 8-hour workday and improved workplace safety standards. The Industrial Revolution also gave rise to new political ideologies, including socialism and Marxism, which critiqued the inequalities inherent in capitalist societies. Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels, writing in the mid-19th century, argued that industrial capitalism was based on the exploitation of the working class, and they predicted that the growing divide between the rich and the poor would eventually lead to a revolution. Marx's ideas, outlined in works such as the Communist Manifesto, 1848, would go on to inspire labor movements and political revolutions around the world, particularly in the 20th century. Gender inequality and child labor. The Industrial Revolution also had a significant impact on gender relations and the role of women in the workforce. In pre-industrial societies, men and women typically worked together in agricultural or cottage industries, with both contributing to the family's economic survival. However, industrialization led to a more rigid division of labor, with men working in factories or mines while women were often relegated to domestic duties or service industries. Women who worked in factories were typically paid less than men, despite often working the same long hours in dangerous conditions. Many women were employed in the textile industry, where they operated machines like the spinning jenny or power loom. The use of child labor was also widespread, with children as young as 5 or 6 working in factories, mines, and mills. Children were often preferred by factory owners because they could be paid less and were small enough to perform tasks that required dexterity, or working in confined spaces. The exploitation of women and children in the workforce drew criticism from social reformers and early feminists, who argued that industrial capitalism was dehumanizing and unjust. Campaigns to limit child labor and improve working conditions for women gained momentum in the 19th century, leading to the passage of laws such as the Mines Act of 1842 and the Factory Act of 1833, which prohibited the employment of women and children in certain hazardous industries and established minimum age requirements for workers. Despite these reforms, gender inequality remained a persistent issue in industrial societies. Women continued to face discrimination in the workplace and were often excluded from higher-paying jobs or positions of authority. The struggle for women's rights, including the right to vote, would become one of the defining social movements of the late 19th and early 20th centuries, as women demanded equal treatment in both the workforce and political life. The global impact of the Industrial Revolution. The Industrial Revolution had a profound impact on the global economy, transforming the relationships between industrialized and non-industrialized regions. As industrial powers like Britain, France, and the United States expanded their economies, they sought new markets and resources in Africa, Asia, and Latin America. This led to a new wave of imperialism, as European powers scrambled to carve up territories in Africa and Asia, exploiting their resources and labor to fuel their industrial growth. The industrial powers used their technological superiority, particularly in military technologies, to dominate and colonize large parts of the world. The use of steam-powered warships, machine guns, and railroads allowed European powers to project their military and economic power across vast distances, subjugating indigenous populations and establishing colonial rule. The industrialized nations justified their imperial ambitions through the ideology of social Darwinism, which argued that European dominance was the natural result of superior technology and civilization. For the colonized regions, the Industrial Revolution brought both disruption and dependency. Traditional economies were often destroyed as industrial goods from Europe flooded local markets, while the extraction of raw materials, such as rubber, cotton, and minerals, drained resources from colonized regions. In many cases, local industries were dismantled, and the colonized peoples were forced into low-wage labor, working on plantations or in mines owned by European powers. The global inequalities that emerged during the Industrial Revolution continue to shape the modern world. Many of the countries that were colonized during this period remain economically disadvantaged as they were forced to become producers of raw materials for industrialized nations. The legacy of this period is evident in the persistent economic disparities between the global North and the global South, as well as in the political and social tensions that continue to arise from the history of imperialism and exploitation. Conclusion. The Industrial Revolution was a period of extraordinary technological innovation and economic growth, but it also gave rise to profound social, economic, and political inequalities. The mechanization of production and the rise of factories transformed the way people worked and lived, creating new opportunities for wealth and prosperity, while simultaneously subjecting millions of workers to harsh conditions and low wages. The disparities between the wealthy industrialists and the working poor, as well as the exploitation of women, children, and colonized peoples, highlight the darker side of the Industrial Revolution. The same technologies that fueled economic growth also facilitated the exploitation of labor and the extraction of resources, leading to a global system of inequality that persists to this day. As we continue to develop new technologies, including artificial intelligence and automation, the lessons of the Industrial Revolution remain relevant. Just as the benefits of industrialization were concentrated in the hands of a few,